Green Lantern War Journal, issue 9. Philip Kennedy Johnson writing with Montos on the art. This is developing the backstory of the Olgren stuff. I will say there's a lot to take in, so I'm not going to say that I completely understand all of it as of yet, because
it's a dense issue. This,
yeah, and it has been. I mean, honestly, the last few issues of this feel like they've been hitting me with a lot of things. The main framing device here, it kind of takes the B plot from the last issue, which was Shepard finding the Book of Oa in Guy Gardner's cupboard, and taking it to him reading this book and asking it questions. He doesn't know anything about the Radiant Dead. He doesn't know anything about the Revenant Queen, because presumably they've never existed in this Earth, this universe.
But it does know about the Dark Stars.
It does, and that's where we get to that backstory, and like the beings that preceded the Guardians, the things that came before them, looking for this ultimate power to try and make the universe better, and some of the turmoil they went through to try and get to this ultimate power, this magic city that they found on the edge of space. I'm simplifying it a bit here, but
well, you are, but also I think a fairly apt summary, and I think it's very notable that this issue is titled Myth and Legend, because that is basically, it's so many myths and legends from history, right? It's Arthur and Camelot, right? That magical city, or in that case the castle that'll fix all our problem. We just get to that. It's such a core idea in a lot of storytelling.
Yeah, and there's like a fallen goddess in the crypt of this city, which is not Olgren, but is the daughter of Olgren, I think they said. When it comes up. And then we come back to like John and what he's doing with the other aliens, but obviously as they're talking about this Dark Star, and we see this symbol inside the city, inside this like tomb or whatever in this city, in the backstory, it's exactly the same sort of star that is sort of looking down upon John Stewart and all of those others. It's almost like they've been put inside this, right? Whatever pocket dimension this is inside this star. So it's kind of like, so okay, we're starting to get a sense of like what this thing is, and the backstory keeps going, and it talks about how these warriors got this power made of light, and this predates all the lanterns, so it's this like light that came from this Dark Star stuff. But it kind of corrupted them, and we'll get into it. I feel like there's a lot to take in this issue. There's also some stuff with John's mother seemingly having a moment where she kind of realizes that this isn't really her daughter, but then kind of like glosses over it when it's pointed out, and just like, oh,
happened a few times over the last handful of issues.
Yeah, but basically she's trying to defend her because one of the Revenant, or the Radiant Dead, show up. We knew he was there. He was watching last issue. We got a tease of that, but we get a little bit of this fight, which looks. I mean, it's not much of it, but it's really nice because of the sort of deep purples versus the greens of the constructs. It's a nice contrast between them. But I mean, what did you make of all this backstory stuff?
I mean, I think the first thing I have to point out is the art, because the dramatic shift between the real world stuff and then the story in the book history is pretty dramatic, and I kind of love it. It's very Liam Sharp-esque. The stuff in the history book, if you think about his, especially some of his later stuff that he got when he got a bit more fantastical. It reminds me a lot of that. And I think that does a lot of the heavy lifting through how dense this is to read. Is it just looks stunning to take in all this visually. As for the actual stuff, it is very much just this. It's core myths and stuff, and it's kind of fascinating to me that we're playing with that, because so much of the Green Lantern stuff up till this point, in general, not just this book, has been history of the universe, and they always want to say, it starts with the Guardians, right? We were there at the start, and we know that's not true. But the fact that there's this prehistory that the book of Oa doesn't really know, like it knows parts, and it's saying this is what happened, but I don't know how accurate this actually is. Like, this is what they think it was. That doesn't mean that's what this is. So I would not be surprised if we learn that some of this is not not actually correct.
Mm.
And we get some subversions from that, which I think will maybe be one of the downsides of this book, because it is so dense. It's hard to remember a lot of these things reading it monthly.
So yeah, there's a lot of
I
details.
think when some of these details are subverted later, I think it'll be harder to pick up on them when you're reading it monthly, because you might not remember all of these little things, because there is a lot of little things.
Yeah, so basically all these different items that are being worn to have light like powers are all part of Olgrun's. Like one's Olgrun's well, one's whatever, and one notably is a ring, right? The Queen's ring is like very much like a Green Lantern ring, but for like
the rest of them are things like, you know, there's the belt, the helmet, the gauntlets, you know your typical suit of armor, basically.
Yeah, so it is interesting to sort of like tie it in to say, oh, this is some kind of like ancestor to what the rings would eventually be. This is like sort of like a seed that would eventually become that. And maybe what inspired the Guardians to even have a power battery and create rings might have even came from some of these legends, and not that the light energy itself comes from Olgrun necessarily, but just the idea that it is kind of a version of that in some way.
It is very there's very not just because it's rings, but the Lord of the Rings vibes. You know, you're very much Aldrin, you know, pouring their will into this ring. It's very Sauron, right? With the One Ring, using that to, you know, corrupt. So I'm sure even you are presumably familiar with this level of Lord of the Rings. Is Sauron's One Ring basically corrupted all of the other rings that that came later. Well, you know, he made the other rings first, but then, you know, the One Ring that actually controls all of them, and it corrupts them, and you know, people who wear the other rings end up falling to his influence because of it. And I know I'm very certain Philip Kennedy Johnson is a big Lord of the Rings fan, because he wrote the Last God comic, which is very heavily inspired by a lot of that sort of level of fantasy. So I can't help but wondering if it's going to play a similar thing here, where, hey, this ring that, you know, okay, you know, you'll say, oh, maybe that was what inspired the other rings, but maybe there is literally more of a no, it can corrupt them as well, and it has like a deeper level to it, and that's why the other lanterns can't fight them.
Well, that would also tie into how the Radiant Queen is basically infecting Green Lanterns and taking them over. That would tie into the corruption side of it.
It would, and I'm thinking, you know, in the other plot where I think that was this book, I'm sure, where, you know, where they can't fight what's going on, where their rings just stop working. It might be the other book with Hal, actually.
That's the Hal book, yeah.
I do wonder if there is maybe some tying in with this. I don't know for sure, but I mean, wouldn't be out of the question, seeing as we have two Green Lantern books at the same time, if they you know, have some connections.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's obviously the art's great. Montos does great shadowy stuff. Obviously the story's very different, you know, the backstory, but whenever it goes back to John or whatever, and they're theorizing what to do to try and get out. They know that the armies of the Radiant monsters are coming, so like we kind of build up to some big fight stuff towards the end.
Yeah, and what I do love about that art switch is the first few pages. So you have a page in the, you know, the normal stuff, and then you have a page, you know, the 2-page splash with the book with that art. I actually thought they had a guest artist doing, you know, one of the other ones. I didn't realize until, you know, I turned the page, and, you know, the next page after that's the credits page, and it says, you know, it's all just Montos, and I was like, oh, that's even more impressive to switch up that dramatically and be equally as impressive in two different, very distinct styles. It makes it even more impressive to me that it's not a guest artist.
Yeah. So the book kind of ends with like John Stewart flying towards battle, effectively, to try and get out of the Dark Star or whatever. It's
he loves his mech suits, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I did like the little touch though of this like motivation, like the construct of his mum kind of appears above him, as if it's just sort of like seeping out of his head kind of thing.
Yeah,
nice little moment. But yeah, so yeah, it even kind of implies, yeah, later on, like, you know, they called them Dark Stars, and it was the idea of like using the rings to make their own brand of warriors, which ultimately is what Green Lanterns are as well. Like, someone made their brand of warrior using rings. So it feels like, yeah, he's doing a lot of this big mythological stuff to kind of tie in and add some depth to maybe some of the really ancient history that leads to like the modern lantern stuff. which is interesting. I do feel like it's probably going to read better though when you can read all the issues together, just because I feel like there's so much going on. And if anything, read Warworld Saga and then go into this, because Warworld Saga was building up to Old Run as well. That was part of that. So he's really continuing this idea of this like mythical power in the universe that's been used in different ways. So
yeah, it's such a fascinating read. This is one that I think is going to benefit a lot from rereads, more so than some other stuff that's being published from DC. And not to knock the other stuff, there's a lot of it's really enjoyable, but this is one that I think is enjoyable, but I think will become even better once it's all out there, and you can kind of not just go start to finish, but once you've finished it, you can then go back and kind of see what all the pieces were actually building to. I think it'll be even better that way.
Yeah, the end of the narration here in the story kind of implies that like one person became a special Dark Star, and I think it's meant to mirror the idea that John Stewart's becoming a special Green Lantern. Like, like in the grand scheme of time, the time of the Dark Stars was not actually that long, but one stood out. And I think the idea is that, it's in the same way that we talk about human beings on Earth. Like, you know what, in the grand history of time since the Earth formed, humans have only been here for a blink of existence, effectively, even though it sounds like thousands of years,
Right, and even now, there's probably only realistically, from all of history, there's only really a handful of names that stand out, right? For anything before the last 100 years or so.
Yeah. Which
is technically history, but it's barely history because it's still in living memory, right? If you go back further than living memory, it's, it is got to be easily less than 1%, 0.5% of all the people who've ever lived that you could, that most people could name.
Even less than that. I mean, a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, not even that people could name, but that there are even named in any records that we can, verify lived. It's a minuscule amount.
Yeah. So, no, he's playing with big ideas, and I kind of appreciate it as being very different to all the other books because of that. It feels like it's trying to hit something.
It definitely has an identity, which not every book can say.
Yep. Matt did send in his thoughts. Montage's art really pops off with all the mythological aspects we see in relating to the Dark Stars, and that's balanced by just how simple the art is for Ellie and Mama Stewart side of the story. PKJ has a knack for recontextualizing the cosmic side of the DCU. I loved everything to do with the Will of Olgron being the source of the Radiant Dead and being the source for a power more ancient than the core. The fact that John is going to do what Byla has told him is impossible shows just how locked in the character PKJ is. That gave me a big dumb smile. I hope we get more of him in Green Lantern. And he gave it an 8 out of 10.
So I think I'll agree with the 8 out of 10.
I guess I'm going to 8 out of 10 again as well, so there we go.